I should have turned around when the first flakes started sticking to the windshield, but by then I was already 40 minutes into a shortcut that had looked perfectly reasonable on the map. The road narrowed between walls of pine, my phone lost its signal, and the snowfall went from picturesque to blinding in less than 10 minutes. Then my car shuddered. The engine coughed once, twice, and died. I managed to coast onto the shoulder before everything went silent except the wind pushing snow against the windows. I tried the ignition 3 times. Nothing. By the time I stepped outside, cold had already found its way through my coat. I had the hood open and absolutely no idea what I was looking at when headlights appeared through the trees. An old work truck stopped behind me. The man who climbed out was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed like the weather was an inconvenience rather than a threat. He approached without wasting words. "You hurt?" No, his eyes moved over me before they moved to the car. "Cold?" "Getting there." Only then did he lean beneath the hood. He introduced himself as Caleb Hayes and told me he was a mechanic. I would have laughed at the luck if my hands hadn't been shaking. After several minutes, Caleb straightened. "Not fixing this here. Can you tow it somewhere?" "My shop." I glanced at the disappearing road behind us. "How far?" "Close enough. Storm's getting worse." He said it with the calm certainty of someone accustomed to being alone out here. Within minutes, he had my car secured and me inside his truck with the heater blasting toward my frozen hands. His workshop sat deeper among the trees beside a small cabin, both half buried in fresh snow. Caleb got my car under cover before taking me inside. He handed me a towel and pointed toward the wood stove. "Warm up first." "Shouldn't we figure out the car?" "Car isn't freezing." I looked at him. His expression remained almost unreadable, but he waited until I moved closer to the stove before taking off his own wet jacket. That contradiction caught my attention. He spoke like every sentence cost him something, yet somehow he had noticed exactly how cold I was. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. Outside, snow swept sideways past the windows, already erasing the tire tracks we had made coming in. "Think the road will be clear by morning?" I asked. Caleb looked through the glass for a long moment. "I wouldn't count on it." I should have been thinking about my dead car and the fact that I was stranded in the woods with a complete stranger. Instead, watching Caleb quietly add another piece of wood to the fire, I found myself wondering why being trapped there suddenly felt like more than just bad luck. Caleb's idea of hospitality seemed to involve giving me everything I needed while acting as though none of it deserved discussion. Once I had stopped shivering, he disappeared down a short hallway and returned with a faded gray sweatshirt and a pair of sweatpants. "Dry clothes," he said. "Bathroom's there." "You keep spare clothes for stranded motorists?" One corner of his mouth moved. "They're mine." When I came back, he had put together a simple dinner at the small kitchen table. I noticed there was only one chair positioned there normally. Caleb pulled a second one from against the wall without comment. "You live here by yourself?" I asked as we ate. "Yeah." "Always this talkative?" "Only when I have company." I laughed before I could stop myself. Caleb looked up, and for a second his expression changed completely. His eyes stayed on me just a little too long, something unexpectedly warm appearing there. Then he lowered his gaze to his plate. I pretended not to notice. After dinner, I offered to help clean up. "You're a guest." "I'm a stranded stranger wearing your pants." "Still a guest." That sounds worse somehow. This time, I definitely saw the beginning of a smile. The cabin itself told me more about Caleb than he did. Everything had a place. One mug beside the coffee maker. One worn jacket by the door. One pair of boots drying near the stove. Nothing about the room looked neglected, but nothing suggested anyone regularly shared it with him either. It felt less lonely than deliberately arranged for one person. The snow kept falling. Every time I looked through the window, the outside world seemed farther away. Caleb checked the stove, then pointed toward the couch. "It folds out. Best place to sleep." "And you?" "Bedroom." "Good." I was worried this was about to become one of those awkward one-bed situations. Caleb paused with his hand on the hallway doorframe. "Disappointed." I stared at him. He stared back, perfectly straight-faced, until I realized he was teasing me. You really hide that personality under several layers, don't you? Keeps it warm. Later, after Caleb had gone to his room, I settled beneath the blanket he had left on the couch. A few minutes later, he came back carrying another one. It gets colder before morning, he said, placing it within reach. You already gave me one. Now you have two. He turned away before I could thank him. I looked at the extra blanket, then toward the empty hallway. Caleb acted like having another person in his cabin was unusual and maybe slightly inconvenient. But he kept noticing things I hadn't asked him to notice. Outside, the storm had made leaving impossible. For the first time, though, I found myself wondering whether Caleb's attention had anything to do with the storm at all. By morning, the windows looked as if someone had painted them white. The snowfall had eased enough to see the workshop from the cabin, but the road beyond the trees had disappeared completely. Caleb was already dressed when I woke, drinking coffee from the single mug I had noticed the night before. A second mug sat beside the pot. For me, I asked, unless someone else showed up overnight. I carried it to the window, so I'm still trapped. Looks that way. He said it neutrally, but when he headed outside to work on my car, I followed. You can stay inside, he told me. I know. It's warmer. Also know that. Caleb gave me a look. Then why are you putting your boots on? Because watching you fix my car sounds marginally more interesting than staring at snow. In the workshop, he opened the hood and started checking the problem while I hovered nearby. After several minutes of me asking questions, Caleb handed me a flashlight. If you're going to supervise, be useful. That sounded almost friendly. Hold the light. I did badly at first. He corrected my angle twice, then finally stepped behind me and guided my wrist toward the part he was inspecting. His hand stayed there only a second, but I suddenly became very aware of how close he was. Caleb seemed to notice at the same moment. He stepped away and went back to work. Eventually he found the fault and explained what he needed to do next. I understood maybe half of it, but enough to follow instructions when he gave me simple tasks. By midday, I had grease on Caleb's borrowed sweatshirt and a ridiculous amount of satisfaction from earning a quiet not bad. Once there was nothing else I could actually help with, I expected him to send me back to the cabin. Instead, Caleb glanced around the workbench. You know how to sort sockets? I know how to recognize numbers. Good enough. It was obviously not urgent. We both knew it. Still, we spent another half hour beside each other reorganizing tools while Caleb occasionally made dry comments about my complete lack of mechanical instincts. That was when something shifted. The storm was still keeping me there, but the storm wasn't making Caleb invent reasons for us to stay in the same room. Back inside, he checked something on his phone near the window where reception apparently came and went. His expression tightened briefly before he put it away. Any news about the road? I asked. Still bad. He moved toward the stove. I watched him for a moment. Can I ask you something? You usually do. Do you actually like having people around? Caleb added wood to the fire before answering. Sometimes. You don't make it obvious. He looked at me then. Liking company and expecting people to stay are different things. The answer was too precise to be casual, but his expression told me not to push. So I didn't. Outside, snow still decided when I could leave. Inside, for the first time, I was beginning to suspect it no longer decided how much time Caleb wanted to spend with me. By the second evening, the storm had swallowed what little distance I could see from the cabin. Snow pressed against the lower windows, and the wind moved through the trees with a low, constant sound that made the room feel smaller than it had the night before. Caleb had checked my car again before darkness forced us inside, but there was nothing useful left for me to do. For once, neither of us invented a task. We sat near the stove with our drinks, close enough that conversation seemed easier than silence. You always take shortcuts through forests during snowstorms? Caleb asked. Only when I'm trying to demonstrate excellent judgment to strangers. Working so far. You rescued me. Clearly you were impressed. His mouth curved briefly. I had started recognizing those almost smiles before he could hide them. The conversation drifted from harmless things into questions neither of us had asked before. When Caleb wondered why I seemed so calm about being stranded, I told him the truth was almost the opposite. I'm good at leaving, I said. Jobs, apartments, people. If something starts feeling like I might need it too much, suddenly I find a reason it isn't right for me. Caleb studied his cup. Sounds efficient. It is, until you realize efficiency isn't the same as being happy. I looked at him. What about you? He was quiet long enough that I expected no answer. Eventually you stop expecting permanent things from temporary people. That sounds suspiciously like experience. It sounds like enough of an answer. There was no anger in it, only a boundary, so I let it stand. Later, when I got up to add wood to the stove, Caleb reached for the same piece. Our hands touched. Neither of us moved immediately. It should have been nothing. Instead, Caleb's fingers shifted slightly against mine, and when I looked up, he was already watching me. We were close enough that I could see the hesitation beneath his usual control. The storm had nothing to do with the way my pulse changed. Caleb let go first. I've got it. He took the wood and turned toward the stove. The distance he created felt deliberate. A few minutes later, I noticed him checking his phone near the window again. Road update, I asked. Just checking conditions. Anything promising? He hesitated for a fraction of a second. Nothing worth relying on. I accepted the answer, although something in the pause stayed with me. When he sat down again, he chose the chair farther from mine. That bothered me more than it should have. I had spent 2 days wondering whether Caleb's attention was simply kindness, whether proximity had made ordinary gestures feel significant. Now I had felt him hesitate over my hand exactly as I had. The question was no longer whether something existed between us. It was whether either of us would admit it before the snow stopped giving us an excuse to stay close. Caleb kept the extra distance between us for almost an hour. He cleaned a counter that was already clean, checked the stove twice, and found several reasons to move around the cabin without looking directly at me. Eventually, I stopped pretending not to notice. Are we going to do this all night? He glanced over. Do what? You know exactly what. I don't. Fine. I set my drink down. Yesterday you kept finding reasons for me to be around you. Tonight you touched my hand like you forgot you were supposed to pull away, and now you're sitting as far from me as this cabin allows. Caleb's jaw tightened. You're reading a lot into things. Am I? He didn't answer. That's what I thought. I stood, mostly because sitting still had become impossible. I'm not asking you to explain your entire life, Caleb. I just want to know whether I imagined what happened. You didn't. The answer came so quietly that I almost missed it. I stopped. Caleb stared at the floor for a moment before looking at me. That doesn't mean I know what to do with it. Neither do I. You leave when the road opens. Probably. The word hurt more than it should have. And that means we pretend nothing is happening until then? Caleb gave a humorless laugh. You make it sound simple. No. I'm saying you keep moving toward me and then acting like I'm the one inventing the distance between us. That finally brought him closer. He crossed the room slowly until only a step separated us. You want honesty? Yes. Having you here has affected me more than it should. My pulse jumped. More than it should according to who? Caleb shook his head, but this time he didn't retreat. His hand lifted, hesitated near my face, then settled, deliberately against the side of my neck. Nothing about the touch was necessary. I wasn't cold. I wasn't hurt. There was no mechanical task requiring his hand on me and no storm strong enough to explain why I leaned into it. Tell me to stop, he said. Instead, I closed the distance. The kiss began cautiously, almost like both of us expected the other to reconsider. Then Caleb's fingers tightened slightly against my neck and I kissed him again, certain this time. When we finally separated, we stayed close enough that our foreheads nearly touched. Caleb exhaled. That was a bad idea. You're terrible at convincing me. A real smile appeared, brief but unmistakable. Then his expression changed again. Ethan, I meant what I said. I don't know what this looks like when you leave. I'm not asking you to know tonight. You should. Why? Because this place isn't normal life. I understood what he meant. Two men isolated in a cabin while snow erased the rest of the world could mistake intensity for permanence. I had been wondering the same thing, but that explanation no longer covered everything. The storm had forced me into Caleb's cabin. It had not forced him to keep me beside him after the work was done. It had not made his hand linger over mine, and it certainly had not made either of us kiss the other. Later, I noticed the small kitchen table again. The second chair Caleb had dragged over on my first night was still opposite his. Two mugs now sat beside the coffee maker. My borrowed clothes hung near his by the stove. His carefully arranged one-person world had begun making room for two without either of us discussing it. Outside, the wind was finally weakening. Through the window, I could see individual trees again instead of a wall of white. For the first time since arriving, improving weather did not feel entirely like good news. Caleb followed my gaze. Neither of us said what we were both thinking. Soon the road would open, and then we would find out whether what had happened between us belonged to the storm, or whether it could survive after the storm stopped deciding for us. Morning changed the cabin before either of us said anything about the kiss. Sunlight finally pushed through the clouds in thin gray bands, and the snow beyond the windows had stopped moving sideways. Caleb stood beside the coffee maker with two mugs already waiting. For one hopeful second, that felt like an answer. Then he looked outside and said, "I can finish the car today." The words landed harder than they should have. "Good," I said. "That's good." We both knew I was lying about at least part of that. In the workshop, there was no pretending the night before had disappeared. Every time Caleb leaned past me for a tool, I remembered his hand against my neck. Every accidental brush of our shoulders felt different now because we both knew what deliberate contact felt like. But Caleb focused on the repair with almost punishing concentration. I helped where I could until he finally started the engine and let it run. The sound should have been reassuring. Instead, I stared at the car like it had betrayed me. "Not completely done," Caleb said, "but close." "So tomorrow?" "Depends on the road." He wiped his hands and avoided my eyes. I wanted to ask whether the kiss depended on the road too. Instead, I watched him move around the workshop, putting tools away as soon as he finished with them. Back in the cabin, the changes I had noticed the previous night began quietly disappearing. Caleb moved the second mug away from the coffee maker after washing it. He folded the extra blanket from the couch. The second chair remained at the table, but somehow the room already felt as though he were preparing to become one person again. That bothered me more than the repaired engine. Later, while Caleb was outside, I went to the window to check my phone. A weak signal appeared. On the small table beneath it lay Caleb's phone, its screen still awake from a recent road update. I wasn't trying to read his messages, but a route notice was visible before the screen dimmed. An alternate access road had been listed with limited passage earlier than I remembered Caleb mentioning any possibility of getting out. When he came back inside, I looked at him. "You checked other routes before today?" He stopped, removing his gloves. "I've been checking conditions." No. I saw the update. Something guarded entered his face. "Those routes weren't reliable. But there was another possibility? Not one I thought was worth using." The answer was reasonable. It should have ended the conversation. Instead, I remembered the slight hesitation when I had asked him about the road the night before. "When did you know?" Caleb looked toward the window. "Ethan, I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking." He was silent long enough to make the question heavier. Then he said, "It wasn't a safe option I was willing to recommend." True, probably, but not complete. I could feel that now. Before I could press further, Caleb picked up his phone and moved toward the stove, putting distance between us again. I let him. The car was almost repaired. The weather was improving. Soon there would be no practical reason for me to remain in his cabin, wear his clothes, drink from his second mug, or wake knowing he was in the next room. The kiss had made one thing certain. Whatever existed between us was real enough to frighten both of us. What I still didn't know was whether Caleb wanted me when leaving was impossible, or whether he had ever wanted leaving to become possible at all. By late afternoon, the sky had cleared enough to show a pale strip of blue between the trees. Caleb had finished the last work on my car, and when he started the engine this time, he didn't tell me there was anything left to fix. We both stood listening to it idle. "So that's it?" I asked. "Car's good. And the road?" "Main road should be passable in the morning." There it was. The end of the storm had finally acquired a deadline. Back inside, Caleb started preparing dinner with the same quiet efficiency he had shown my first night, except now I knew what his mouth felt like against mine, and the silence between us was no longer neutral. I watched him for a minute before saying, "I want the rest of the answer." His hands stopped. "About the alternate road." Caleb turned slowly. "I told you it wasn't reliable. You told me it wasn't worth using. That isn't the same thing. It was limited access. Bad conditions. No guarantee you'd get through." "I understand that." I held his gaze. "But was that the only reason you didn't tell me?" Caleb looked away, and that was enough. "No," he said finally. My stomach tightened. "Then what was the other reason?" He leaned both hands against the counter. "There was a window when I could have looked into getting you toward town that way. Maybe it would have worked. Maybe we would have driven halfway there and turned around. I decided it wasn't worth the risk." He paused. "And by then, I didn't particularly want it to work." I stared at him. Caleb forced himself to continue. "I liked having you here. So you kept that option from me because you wanted me to stay? I didn't trap you, Ethan. I didn't touch your car to keep it broken. I didn't lie about the weather. If there had been a safe road out, I would have told you. But there was a possibility. A bad one." His voice softened. "And I wanted more time." The admission rearranged the last few days in my head. The unnecessary work beside him, the way he checked conditions without volunteering details, the extra reasons to keep me nearby. I should have been angry. Part of me was. Another part understood exactly why the truth hurt so much. Caleb had wanted me before the kiss. Maybe much earlier than I had allowed myself to believe. "You wanted more time," I said. "What do you want tomorrow?" He went still. "Ethan." "No. That's the part one don't understand. You can admit you wanted me stuck here one more day. But now that I can actually choose whether to stay, you won't say anything. Because tomorrow you get your life back. And you've already decided that life doesn't include you?" Caleb's silence answered for him. I shook my head. "You keep expecting people to leave, and then you make sure you never have to ask them not to." His expression tightened, but he didn't argue. That night, the second chair stayed at the table, yet the distance between us felt greater than it had when we were strangers. Before bed, Caleb checked the road one final time. "They're clearing the main stretch tonight," he said. "You should be able to go after sunrise." I waited. Some part of me expected him to add something, to ask me to stay for breakfast another hour, anything. He didn't. "Okay," I said. Outside, the storm was over. My car was repaired. By morning, nothing would be keeping me in the woods. And the man who had secretly wanted more time with me was standing 10 feet away, letting the last of it disappear. I woke before sunrise and knew immediately that the cabin felt different. There was no wind against the windows, no snow striking the roof, nothing outside insisting I remain where I was. Caleb was already awake. My borrowed clothes had dried, and I changed back into my own before folding his sweatshirt and sweatpants beside the couch. When I carried my bag toward the door, his eyes followed it. "Road?" I asked. "Open." One word. That was all. We drank coffee at the table with the second chair still across from his, but neither of us managed much conversation. Afterward, Caleb carried my bag to the workshop while I followed. My car started immediately. He checked everything once more, then closed the hood. "You're good. You already said that yesterday." "I'm saying it again." I almost laughed, but neither of us was pretending this was about the car anymore. Caleb handed me the keys. His fingers touched mine briefly and withdrew. "Drive slowly until you reach the main stretch." "I will." "There may still be ice under the packed snow. Caleb. He stopped. I wanted him to say it. After everything he had admitted the night before, I needed him to choose what happened now instead of letting the road choose for him. But he only looked at me with that same controlled expression he had worn when we first met. So I opened the driver's door. I put my bag inside. I even sat behind the wheel. Caleb stepped back, giving me a clear path toward the road. The engine idled beneath me. Nothing was broken. Nothing was blocked. Nothing required me to stay. I looked through the windshield at the track leading between the trees and realized how easily I could do what I had always done. Leave before wanting something became dependence, call the last few days an intense accident, and protect myself from finding out whether it could become more. I reached for the gear shift. Ethan. I looked up. Caleb was standing beside the car. Now, whatever control he had been holding onto was gone. Don't go yet. I waited. He swallowed. Not because of the road. Not because I need to check the car again. I don't have another excuse. He glanced toward the open route behind me, then back at my face. I want you here. My chest tightened. Caleb continued before fear could stop him. I wanted you here when I should have told you about that other route. I wanted you here when we were working on things that didn't need doing. And I want you here now, when there's absolutely nothing keeping you. He took a breath. Stay because you want to. If you don't, I'll understand. But I'm done pretending I don't care which one you choose. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then I turned off the engine. Caleb stared at me as I stepped out. You know, I said, asking someone to stay works better when you actually ask. A shaky laugh escaped him. Stay. Okay. The relief on his face was so open that it nearly undid me. I stepped closer. But I'm not staying because I'm stranded. I know. And this doesn't become something we blame on the storm afterward. I don't want it to. Good. I kissed him. There was no hesitation this time. No question about whether cold, isolation, or adrenaline had pushed us together. Caleb pulled me closer, and I let him, knowing the road behind me was open the entire time. When we separated, I kept my hand against his jacket. I do have to leave eventually. I know. His expression tightened for half a second before I continued. That isn't the same as leaving you. Caleb looked at me carefully. What are you saying? I'm saying we find out what this is somewhere that isn't buried under 3 feet of snow. A real date. Normal life. No broken car required. His smile came slowly. I can probably manage that. And until then? He glanced toward the cabin. Coffee? You make a compelling romantic offer. This time he laughed. I took my bag back out of the car myself. The storm had forced me through Caleb's door the first time. Walking back toward the cabin beside him, with my repaired car waiting behind us and the road completely clear, was the first time staying had been. Entirely my choice. We stayed long enough for the morning to become ordinary. That mattered more than I expected. Without the storm roaring outside, there was no emergency to hide behind. No broken car demanding our attention. Caleb made more coffee. I put the second mug beside his without asking, and when we sat at the small table, neither of us treated the second chair like temporary furniture anymore. Eventually, I did have to leave. This time, when I carried my bag outside, Caleb came with me without the guarded silence from earlier. My car waited exactly where I had left it, repaired and ready. Still want that date? I asked. You've given me several minutes to reconsider. And still want it. We chose a day before I started the engine. Something simple, somewhere beyond the woods, where neither weather nor circumstance could decide how long we stayed together. Caleb leaned against the open door. Text me when you get there. You realize that requires giving me your number. He looked almost offended. I fixed your car and kissed you. I assumed we were past formal introductions. I laughed, and he smiled in that unguarded way I had learned was rare. Then he kissed me once more before stepping back. Driving away felt nothing like I had imagined during those first snowbound nights. I wasn't escaping. Caleb wasn't disappearing behind me. The road connected us now instead of separating us. In the weeks that followed, we kept the date. Then another. Sometimes Caleb came out of the woods to meet me. Sometimes I drove back to the workshop. The first time I returned, the snow along the road had shrunk into dirty banks beneath the trees, and every turn looked different in daylight. My car was running perfectly. My phone had signal. The weather was clear. There was absolutely no reason I had to be there. When the workshop appeared ahead, Caleb was already outside waiting for me. I parked and stepped out. "Car trouble?" he asked. "Terrible. Keeps driving me back here." He shook his head, smiling, and reached for me when I got close. Through the cabin window behind him, I could see 2 mugs beside the coffee maker and 2 chairs at the table. His world had not transformed overnight, and neither had mine. I still knew how easily I could run when something started mattering too much. Caleb still had years of practice expecting people to leave. But now we recognized those instincts before they could make our choices for us. The first time I came down that road, snow had erased every option until staying with Caleb was the only one left. Now the road was open beneath a clear sky, my car was repaired, and I could turn around whenever I wanted. I looked at Caleb waiting beside the workshop and understood why that freedom mattered. I wasn't there because a storm had trapped me in the woods. I was there because I had left, discovered I could go anywhere, and chosen to come back.